Hi, everyone. My name is Marlene, and welcome back to another episode of Python on Azure with Marlene and Gwen. In today's episode, we have Sydney joining us. Sydney is from LangChain and one of the lead maintainers for LangGraph. Super excited to have you here with us today, Sydney. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I'd love to.
Yeah, definitely. Super excited to be joining you guys. My name is Sydney. I work on open source at LangChain, specifically on our Python open source tools. So as Marlene mentioned, both LangChain and LangGraph. LangChain itself is a company kind of built on the foundation of those open source tools. And we offer kind of other observability and deployment options for AI applications. But very excited to be kind of chatting about those open source foundations and what you can do with them.
Awesome. Yeah, we do a bunch of work with LangChain. Microsoft has a bunch of integrations in LangChain and love everything that you're working on. And know we have some exciting things to talk about. So we would love to, just before we get started as well, just hear from you. How did you get into open source? So I think when I talked to you in the past, you've worked on different open source projects. Could you tell us like your journey with open source?
Yeah, so my journey with open source actually started really early. I think basically every Python developer uses open source tooling, right? Like if you've ever used pandas or requests or anything like that, right? Like all of these tools are public and maintained by community members and dedicated developers. And so in high school, I got started writing Python code and started using Streamlit, which is a cool like visualization or app building tool. And that was like a great way to get started really quickly with building UIs in Python. And then through my first couple of like internships, got started with other open source tools. Notably, Pydantic was one that I found a lot of interest in. Pydantic does data validation for Python and kind of type enforcement. And towards the end of my college or time in college, I reached out to Samuel Colvin, who's the author of Pydantic, and asked if Pydantic, the company, was interested in having an intern. And then I got to start working for them while I was in college. So that's
Wow.
really
Well,
like,
I just want to start out there and say that's amazing. That I didn't
Yeah.
know that you reached out to them.
yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah,
yeah. So
can you talk just a little more about how that went?
yeah. So I mean, I have a blog post that I wrote about like the value of cold emails,
Yeah,
Emailing.
I love it.
sending, being ambitious with emails. I think my blog post actually talks about the fact that I found my favorite tomato soup recipe by sending a bunch of cold emails. But anyways, in a like career sense, yeah, reached out to Samuel and he was very kind and eager to like give me a shot at interning for Pydantic. And so during my last year of school, I basically did school stuff for half of my time, and then half of my time was maintaining Pydantic.
That's impressive. That is like, I I'm sure a lot of people listening to this. Well, we have a lot of people who ask questions about like, it's a tough market. Like, what can I do to like, land a role and stuff like that. But
Yeah,
you kind of just made it happen for yourself. You like, what
exactly.
was it?
Coach it.
Just yeah, you just went like, all right, I'm gonna go get this. Let's do it. Do you have like, I know we had this question at the end, but I feel like it's relevant to ask here. Like, if someone wanted to have that approach, what do you think they would need to kind of have on their? Because it's not like I can just start programming Python tomorrow and be like, all right, I'm gonna go ask someone for a job. Like, how do you feel? Like, what do you feel people need in order to be able to make a move like you did?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I like cited in that initial email was some open source contributions that I had made. So I think we hear a lot like build up your profile of personal projects and things like that, right? Which is great, good way to like get started and work on things you're passionate about. But I think like super early getting started with like how can I help this open source project is a great way to kind of immerse yourself in more professional code and like you know CI systems and kind of other things that you're more likely to like actually see in a job as a developer later. And so I think having those really helped. And luckily, a lot of open source repositories are really good about welcoming new contributors and kind of giving them this like on-ramp for like, okay, so you want to get started and you're like, maybe new to coding even, but like, here's how you can help us improve our docs, or like, here's how, help us fix this small bug, or things like that.
Yep, that's awesome. I know we'll have a bunch more sort of related questions that we probably can ask throughout. But I know you brought some demos you want to show us. I'm very excited. Marlene has
Yes.
way more experience with LangChain and LangGraph than I do, so this is going to be a very good learning experience for myself. So I'm very excited. Do you want to share your screen? I can bring it up here and then we can see what you've got.
Yeah, definitely.
Marlene, how long ago did you start doing LangChain stuff?
I think I don't even know, like really early, because before I was at Microsoft, I want to say like 3 years ago, before I was at Microsoft, I started experimenting with it. I was working at a startup called Voltron Data, and I thought LangChain was really interesting even back then in just like it was one of the first frameworks. I think it was the first framework in Python that actually like made it easy to use LLMs with like data processing libraries like pandas. And so I want to say this was like 3 years ago, but like LangGraph wasn't around when I first started. So it's going to be, I'm interested to see what's new, what's coming up. So yeah, what do we have on the screen? Yeah.
Yeah, very excited to talk more about this. So I guess I'll give a little bit of context for, we're throwing around the terms LangChain and LangGraph. So for folks that are a little bit less familiar, yeah, LangChain started 3 years ago almost now. It was released about a month before ChatGPT came out. And it was a way to make it easy for Python developers to interact with LLMs. And so what that looks like has really evolved significantly over the past 3 years. Even on like 3-month increments, right? We're seeing like the ways that we interact with LLMs change. But one of the kind of core pieces that we've seen stay pretty consistent is this like agent or this agentic pattern, what we call this like agentic loop, where you give a model some tools and it like calls tools in a loop, and then it decides it's done at some point. And so LangChain initially set the foundations for like, adding tons of integrations like Azure integrations and OpenAI integrations and Anthropic integrations, and even things like embeddings and like vector databases, just kind of like everything under the sun that had to do with interacting with LLMs, LangChain tried to make easier for developers. But we started to see that folks wanted more control over interactions with LLMs. And that's kind of what LangGraph was born out of, is that like, if you want to build an application that's going to go into production, you probably need a little bit more control over like each step. And so what we're looking at now is that like classic tool calling loop. You have like a graph structure here, which is going to be really familiar for developers, or you could call it a workflow even. So we see, a start node, then this like agent, or we'll soon rename it model node, that can call tools, and that kind of goes in a loop. And then when it's done calling tools, we'll jump to end. And specifically this like agent demo that I have up is like email assistant agent. So I can show a little demo of like what it might look like to send an email with this helper.
Let's do it. Quick question.
Yeah.
You're inside of LangSmith, and for those who don't know what LangSmith is, do you want to give like a quick just one line or something?
Yeah. So LangSmith is our observability platform for agentic applications or anything built with LLMs. So it helps with tracing your LLM calls and workflows, and then also doing like evaluations to help your models perform better, and you can kind of like score how models are doing. You can also do like prompt engineering, so you can kind of see all that on the side panel here, but the tab that we're in is called Studio, which is really great for like demos and like stepping through and debugging things. It helps you kind of visualize your graph and like step through and see what's going on.
Awesome.
But yeah, so this is like Sydney's basic email agent. I'm gonna add a message here that says, send an email to Sydney and ask if we can catch up over a coffee on Friday. I'm quite the coffee addict. So I'll hit submit. We can see the agent is, so we send this human message. The agent makes a tool call to the send email tool. And we can see that it intuited my request pretty well, right? So the to email is sydney@langchain.dev, and then the content of the email is asking if I want to get some coffee. And then the tool successfully runs, and the agent comes back with this response that says, great, we sent an email to Sydney.
Amazing. This is super cool to be able to see it like in this interface as well. Like, so for here, is this Python code running in the background to be able to build this out? Like, what would, how do you get from like the background stuff with the background Python code to what you see on the screen here? Or do you define it here for the graph?
Yeah. Great question. I will switch over to my IDE. So it's really cool that all that I'm powering this application with is these like 9 lines of code, right?
Yeah.
So I will say a dummy email tool, right? We're not actually calling it Gmail API right now. But basically in 3 lines of code, or in 2 lines of code even, we're calling the create agent function, which is in LangChain, but it uses LangGraph under the hood. And then giving our agent some tools and a model. I could also give it a prompt that says like, hey, you're Sydney's personal email assistant, like make sure to be kind and not too verbose, but like genuine, and, kind of give it more personal direction.
Oh, this is awesome. Yeah, this is one thing that I really love about LangChain is that it just makes the whole process of building agents really easy, and you can see even adding tools is super straightforward. So I think this is really nice. I didn't know that we had the tool decorator that you could add on. Well, I think maybe I've seen it, but is this something people can use now, or has this always been there? And I just have not been using it.
Yeah, the tool decorator has been there for a while, but definitely something I would recommend folks using. It's nice because you can add kind of custom configuration to your tools. So we can see here that you can add like a description, whether or not you want that tool to like return directly to the kind of, or whether you want to like jump to the end of the agent loop when it's called. And then, like, do you want to parse the doc string to get information about the tool arguments and things like that? I think we see one of the like very common failure modes with folks is they like write tools that do great things, and then there's not good enough documentation attached that the like model can infer to call them appropriately. So
Exactly.
trying to make that easier with the decorator here.
That's a good tip. So everyone keep that in mind. Make sure it's not only good code and functionality, but it's also documented.
Yes,
100%.
And I think we'll touch on this a little bit more later, but LLMs are pretty good at helping improve documentation, which is cool. So it's sort of this like self-fulfilling cycle.
This is also something I wanted to ask you as well in terms of, so you help to maintain LangGraph, and LangGraph is open source. LangChain in general is open source, which is amazing. But what would you say, how often have you been using LLMs in your process for maintaining the code? Do you use LLMs a lot? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, great question. I think this is another one of those things that is really changing rapidly for developers, right? I personally use LLMs, I would say, a moderate amount compared to at least other developers around me. I think they can be really helpful for kind of discussing like API ideas and things like that, like almost a companion to bounce like ideas off of and talk about like pros and cons of different design approaches and things like that. I think also they can be great for like autocomplete and test assistance. So like I've written, a couple of robust test cases on my own, and then I'd like to kind of extend those, or even I'm like using it for maybe more strategic find and replace, right? Like I want to make sure I'm also updating like doc strings or things like that. Where I'm not using them like quite as much as other developers around me yet is like for full refactors or fixes or features. Not to say that they can't be useful, but I think if you're adding something that's really significant to a code base, it's good to like still have pretty thorough review there. So it's definitely a balancing act, and I think the like coding agents are getting a lot better very quickly. But yeah, still trying to toe the line of like, when do we need really like human review here, and when is that valuable? What about you guys? What do you find yourself doing?
I do a mix of things. Like I still like using a lot of like the code completion, like Azure just typing and then like tab. Like I find a good mix to leverage that, a good mix as well. And then I'm definitely going between, because in GitHub Copilot, shameless plug, we have Ask mode, we have Agent mode, right? I like starting a lot in Ask, just really understanding what I'm trying to build, really clarifying all the like things I'm trying to accomplish. And then once I have like a great idea, I'll probably type up a prompt and just send it off to Agent mode. And then kind of like, I'll try to do it in stages where, let's say I wanted to build like 4 different things or 4 different functionalities. I'll get like the first one done, and then I'll pause, I'll look at it, I'll make sure it's heading in the right direction, and then keep going. That's like, I think the majority of my stuff is that way. I like to think of it as like different types of tools. Like the code completion is like fine details, like for bigger things. I'm sure there's like a analogy that I could come up with now if I was a creative person. But yeah, I just like to think of it like what specifically I'm trying to accomplish, and I'm sure I could figure out which tool is best for the use case. But I'm a big fan of like all the, obviously, right? I don't think I'd be at the shop if I wasn't a big fan of these tools. But yeah, Marlene, how about you?
The Ask mode is really great for like, especially when you're onboarding or like learning a new code base.
Yeah,
It's like, with
100%.
like context window length and stuff, they do really well at helping explain things.
Someone the other day, they have like the part of the onboarding docs, they have a prompt workbook. I think that's what they're calling it. And it's like, on this file, ask these questions, on this file, ask these questions. And it sort of like allows the new person on the team to, it's not like, oh, you have to read all of this. Like you can kind of go and experience the docs and inform yourselves in ways that work for you. I think that's pretty neat. I think there's a lot of stuff that's coming out like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Ask mode is super helpful for onboarding for sure. I think for me, it's definitely a mix of both of what you shared, both of you shared. So for me, it's like creating samples. 100%. I'm using agent mode. I'm using like, I think what Gwen was saying there in terms of like being a bit more modular with it. So building out different parts. So maybe starting out with a certain part of the code and asking Copilot to generate some code there, and then like building it up as I understand or edit myself. But that would be mainly for samples. But definitely, I feel scared. I don't feel scared to be using it to like fully refactor big code bases. So like right now I'm helping maintain the LangChain Azure integrations, and I work with other people that do it, but I feel like that's something I'm a bit more hesitant to for sure do like a full refactor on, because the code is like, it's a problem. If there's a hallucination or something, it would be a pretty big deal. But I do use it for like the docs and stuff, like creating examples or notebooks. And I do want to use it more for documentation, like maybe auto-generating docs. So yeah, I'm kind of in the middle there, I would say, for sure.
Yeah. I think like one really interesting thing that we're like all getting at here, especially with the like modular development in agent mode, is that like human in the loop feedback is really
crucial.
important.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
it'll make or break it. Like
Yeah.
you have to know what you're doing. Like that's why. All right, Mike, we might be going on a rant and a tangent here, but like that's my issue with like the vibe coding is like, I don't see how you could end up with something that is actually good if you're not heavily involved in the process. Like I don't see,
Yeah.
like we chatted with Armin Ronashare like a month ago, and he said like yeah, you can pretty much like just go through everything, tab, but and you can choose to like sort of turn your brain off and go into autopilot mode or whatever. But if you go and see the logs, look at which tools are getting executed, understanding like you can learn a lot from that process. There might be things
Yeah.
that you just
Yeah.
you don't know that you pick up from there. And I have found that that's pretty useful. Like maybe I'm typing less, but I'm definitely looking at the screen and saying, okay, wait, no, actually that's not the direction I want to head. Stop it. Let's, change it and like keep going.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most like common features that we've seen asks for from developers is like, how can I build human in the loop into my applications like very seamlessly and like make that kind of a first class citizen. And I can actually show kind of the second part of our demo here, which is
Let's do it.
if I
Love a segue.
have an email agent, I don't think I would want it to be sending emails without my like checkmark approval. Like draft things, right? So we see this middleware agent like pretty, our basic agent has just a couple lines of code. And this one is the same here. So this is using our new human in the loop middleware, which is very exciting. And I'll talk a little bit about what middleware is in a moment, but just kind of for this use case, we see the exact same code signature, except we've added this middleware argument. It has human in the loop middleware, and we're saying we want to interrupt on the send email tool. And what that's basically saying is like, before we send an email, let's get an approval first, right? And I'll pivot back to the studio here in a second, but I'll talk a little bit more about kind of middleware generally, which is we've seen throughout the like 3 years of LangChain's success that core like model, tool, prompt loop is really helpful. But I think we're also starting to see folks wanting to build more complex applications, right? Like you want to have a really long running agent. You might be at risk of like context overflow because the conversation is so long. So you need summarization. Or you want to have an agent performing tasks that are a little bit expensive or risky. So you want to build in human in the loop patterns. And I think the first approach that LangChain took to these things was like, let's build out a bunch of kind of pre-built options for all of those. Like here's a RAG agent and here's a SQL agent and those things. But again, like the main push for LangGraph was we're seeing like drive for customization. And so middleware is kind of our way of approaching that, which is like, here's your model and tool loop. And we know that is going to be the foundation. And then middleware allows you to like inject logic kind of anywhere in that loop that you'd like.
That's super cool. What something that's interesting is like you showed the human in the loop middleware. What other middleware options do we have? Like, so there's the interrupt option. Do we have other middleware options?
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to release V1 of LangChain in a couple weeks, and we've kind of built it on top of LangGraph because we've seen that like durable execution model kind of under the hood really have successful use cases for folks. And we're going to release it with a couple of pre-built middlewares. So one of them is summarization. And then a lot of the other middlewares are pretty catered to like what we've seen as this emerging trend of context engineering, right? Like you want to be able to control exactly what's going into your LLM so that it can perform really well. So what that looks like is like dynamic model middleware. So maybe like based on the conversation length or your user's like subscription tier, you could change the model or the provider. Or a dynamic tools middleware, right? Like maybe you want to give your model like a couple tools at first and let it like decide what path it wants to go down and then give it more relevant tools. So very excited about the kind of pre-built middlewares that we're releasing, but maybe even more excited is like, I can't wait to see what community middlewares people build.
Right,
because it's
exactly
composable and pluggable. So very excited for that kind of in the vein of like open source things. But yeah, I can do a little demo here. So I'm going to ask again if, so just adding a human message here and I'll note we have like the model request and then you can see we're going to like kind of check before we actually execute those tool calls and then eventually jump to end. So I'm asking again if this person wants to get coffee. We see similar request, like model makes a tool call to the send email tool and, asks if Sydney wants to get coffee. But what I've realized here is that I actually am only free at 8 a.m. on Friday, right? So I want to maybe edit the message before we send it here. So we see an interrupt here that's been raised by the middleware, and it says tool execution requires approval. Here's the content and the to email. So I'm going to paste in that I want to respond and say, please suggest that we meet at 8 a.m. so that the email is a little bit more specific. I'm going to resume here. We can see it goes back to a model request. And then the new tool call is edited. Would you be available to catch up over coffee at Friday at 8? Awesome.
Very cool. Yeah.
And then I think that email looks great. I'm going to accept it this time. So we have type accept, resume, and then we'll see the tool is called and the AI or the model responds with the email inviting Sydney to catch up has been successfully sent. So very cool use case here. And I think we can kind of extrapolate this pattern to those coding agents that we're all so obsessed with, right? It's here's my initial plan for refactoring your code base. What do you think? And you're actually, let me guide you in a slightly different direction before you, go refactor everything. But yeah, very nice that you can kind of plug and chug and maybe I want to interrupt on some tools, but not others. You can check the weather without my approval, but maybe don't send an email to my boss without my approval, right?
100%.
This is so cool. I've not used this studio functionality before, but it really does I find people really get confused with understanding what's actually a tool, when do things get passed from one thing to another, and it really makes it really easy to understand. I'm going to point more people to leverage something like this because it's very easy to understand what's actually happening.
Yeah, I think especially for long running conversations where you're wait, when did it call that tool? Why did it call that tool? How did it react to my feedback? It's super great to be able to go back and kind of see the traces. And I guess I'll hype LangGraph a little bit up here.
Yeah.
So
please do.
Our agent builder is built on LangGraph under the hood.
Wow.
Very nice.
LangGraphception.
Yeah, exactly. So we again, the pattern was LangChain with kind of all these pre-built things, and then we were well, folks really need more control, so let's release Graph, which is a tool that allows you to kind of build these graphs from scratch. I'm going to add these nodes and these edges and these conditional edges, and that's great, but it is a little bit more complex, right? It's a little bit of a higher threshold to get started, a higher activation energy, if you will. And so now kind of our third iteration is under the hood, LangGraph stuff is great, but let's make it really easy for people to get started with that 2 lines of, create agent code. And then the benefits that folks reap from the LangGraph runtime, I'll list off a couple things. So one of them is the human in the loop, interrupt functionality. Another is what we like to call durable execution. So let's say this model request failed because my model provider is having API issues. These steps are checkpointed. And so I could actually go and retry or replay from any given step, which is really nice. It's also nice, if I didn't like the direction that the model was going in, I can step back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. 100%.
Finally, and this is a huge thing for agent frameworks, is streaming is very much a first-class citizen here, because models can be really slow, right? And it's not very engaging for users if they don't get real-time feedback about decisions the model is making, etc. So LangGraph is great at streaming events okay, we jumped from model request to the human feedback node to the tool node, but then also LLM responses can be streamed as well.
You mentioned that there will be a couple of middlewares that will be provided, y'all have worked on. Curious if you can speak to how you decided what that list of middleware would be.
Yeah, great question. So we had a couple of ideas initially. So human in the loop and summarization, I think, were the first two that we were like, we see so much need for these. But I think the way that we decided on other valuable ones is really cool. We have this, what we call applied AI team internally at LangChain, and they're building really cool things. So a couple of projects they've worked on, one was OpenSui, which is basically like a coding agent built on top of LangGraph. Or most recently, they developed an open source package that we will continue to promote called Deep Agents. And Deep Agents, again, uses all these patterns under the hood, but it uses kind of like a planning middleware. So when you're using your coding agents, you'll often see that they make like to-do lists for themselves.
Right.
And
Exactly.
like update it and cross them off, just like we as humans are also like better at getting things done if we make lists and keep track. And so after those like foundational middlewares were decided on, we ported our deep agents logic and other like applied AI projects over to the middleware system, and tried to figure out like what middlewares do these need, because these are like, you know, agents with real use cases. So we added a planning middleware, for example, or a file system middleware. So yeah, mostly it was like porting over our like internal applied AI use cases to see like what would be helpful.
What was there one that isn't on the list, but you are excited to see the community contribute?
Ooh, that's a great question. So we have a couple of guardrail middlewares in the works. I think guardrail is a pretty like buzzy term right now because, of course, LLMs go off the rails and you need to kind of control what goes in and what comes out. But it's hard to like cover all the cases, right? And so I'm really interested to see like what specific guardrails are folks invested in having on either side of their models. You know, like we can kind of do the classic, like, let's not send PII to the model, or let's make sure that, you know, the model is like not saying anything inappropriate, or like bad about, you know, competitors or things like that. But excited to see like more applied cases.
Yeah, very cool. Something that I think the middleware would be interesting for, and I've seen it as well, is like the dynamic tool filtering part as well. I think particularly for MCP, just because that's something that probably one of the biggest complaints people have for MCP is when developers are creating their MCP servers, they'll like build in all these tools, just like converting from an API, and then you'll have this overload of tools. And so I think having that middleware for the MCP part is really great, and being able to actually filter. I think you mentioned a dynamic tool filtering or dynamic something with the tools, right?
Yeah, Marlene,
Yeah.
you're reading my mind. So we have sort of two tool middlewares in the works. One is,
So
I guess we'll
nice.
back up. We have these pre-built middlewares to make it easy to kind of plug and chug with common patterns, and then we also make it pretty easy to customize middleware. It's really just a series of hooks. So that's kind of where we're excited to see the like community development.
Yeah.
But I think we see a common use case for just wanting to control the set of tools available at steps. So you can do that by just kind of hooking into the like prepare model request step. But the other thing we've seen, with the like with agents that have access to a huge number of tools, basically a number of tools that would result in context overflow to like be able to specify. We have this like, we used to call it like a big tool pattern.
Yeah.
But it's basically like, let's use an LLM before our main LLM to select the tools that are going to be appropriate for some task, and then feed that context into our like main LLM. So right now we're calling that the LLM tool selector middleware. If anyone has better names for that one, would love to like shed on that. But yeah, it's very cool.
Naming things is hard. No one's gonna
Yeah.
figure that one out.
Yeah, honestly, it's one of the toughest things in software. I think something else that you wanted to ask as well is, have you seen, so you talked about deep agents, which I also think is very interesting, but like, have you seen like interesting use cases for agents, or like what would be your favorite use cases for agents that you've seen? I think the email use case you shared just now is really cool. But what other interesting stuff do you think is out there?
Yeah, man, there are so many. It's hard. It's like there are some that I personally would love. So like email assistant, fantastic, or just kind of any sort of like personal assistant. Along those lines, maybe like content generation assistants are interesting. I haven't toyed around with that myself. I would like to soon. Another one that I'm personally interested that's kind of a small scale thing is I love like athletics and running and that sort of thing. And I think I don't know if either of you are Strava users, but I would love to give an agent access to my like Strava account and have it like make training plans for me.
Very
So those are
cool.
kind of all like personal assistant ones that I think are cool. But in the broader scale, I don't know. I think like agents applied to health tech are very
Yeah.
interesting. It seems like a place where like if you can give doctors and nurses, et cetera, like more time to focus on patients, then that is exciting. But would love to hear what you guys think about kind of promising or exciting use cases.
Okay, fine.
Go ahead, Marlene.
I was just gonna say the Strava one is cool, and I would love an agent that just posts and does stuff on my Strava, because I don't want to look at Strava because I feel bad. I feel like I'm competing with everyone on Strava, so I just want the agent to just do update and like people's like auto like people's stuff. But I don't want to actually be there, so I think that would be kind of cool to have. But yeah, I don't know, Gwen, have you seen anything interesting like recently, like agent use cases?
I saw one yesterday. Literally was watching a YouTube video. I'm like, I need to go do this for myself today. So after this, I'm gonna go play around with that. Do you either of you use Obsidian? Or have you heard of Obsidian, the note taking
Heard
app?
of Obsidian. I
Yeah.
don't use it. No. Yeah.
So it essentially which saves your notes in Markdown, right? And we know that LLMs love Markdown. So you kind of centralize your notes in one place, and then depending on the task you're trying to accomplish, you'll have a specific agent tailored to accomplishing that task. Like if you're like for my particular use case, I like using Obsidian to write out like talk tracks for presentations as I'm like putting slides together. So I would like something that can help me figure out like, oh, does that the text on the slide plus the talk track that I'm saying make sense? Like, are they cohesive? And then I could have one be like a researcher, like, okay, how could we actually like go look at like all the information that I've kind of like brain dumped into it? What do you think is most relevant to like put in here? Like stuff like that would be so awesome. And they were using I think it was Claude Code, so like the CLI. And then they were just it was all in the terminal. It was sick. It was all in the terminal, like quick commands, all the markdown is there, like file, like creating, editing, stuff like that. So I'd be we have a shameless plug. We have the GitHub Copilot CLI and that's out now. So I'm definitely gonna try to see how I can do stuff with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other agent thing that I think is could be interesting is like I do a lot of stuff with developers who primarily speak Spanish, and like their code base is, because the tech world is in English, the code base is in English, but a lot of the comments and like the documentation is in Spanish, and a lot of their interactions with these tools are in Spanish, and it's not like one like V1 like comparison. Like English, it's like these tools are going to understand better if you can interact with them, but like if the language barrier is your thing, right? So perhaps there could be like an agent that, and I know our lead Anthony was talking about this as well. It's like, is there something in the middle that we could put between the person's like native language? What can we use in the middle there? So, whatever AI is at the other side has like a better chance at like really understanding what they're saying. Like how do we improve that language barrier between devs speaking their native language and these tools like actually generating what we expect them to do? So I think stuff like that could be really, really cool.
That's a really cool use case. I feel like that also sounds like something where like having like evals and scoring for like how good is that like translation middleware or VS middleware, but that's a really cool use case.
Yeah, definitely. We had a couple of like sort of open source maintainer questions we wanted to ask before we end this
Great.
this chat here. I've seen this a lot on like social media of like people talking about are like complaining, or again, there was all sorts of opinions on this, right? I don't want to like criticize anyone because I know open source maintainment is hard, right? But there's this thing about people submitting PRs and the majority of the work is done, like it's so obvious that it is done with, some kind of AI tool. Like, curious as a maintainer, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my thoughts have really evolved here. Like a year to a year and a half ago, I was like pretty skeptical, maybe even borderline annoyed by like very AI generated PRs. But my general open source philosophy is like this kill 'em with kindness approach, where like I like to assume that people have good intent and like want to learn and that sort of thing. And I think with coding agents getting much better, I appreciate anyone who's taking the time to like look at an open source repository and try to make contributions. I think the thing that I appreciate the most is like if you want to submit a PR that has like clearly used AI, that's okay. But I hope that you're like dedicated and engaged in like making it, getting it all the way across the line, right? Like maybe the AI agent can do a good job for the first 80%, and then hopefully you're like engaged for that 20%. I think if you don't want to be engaged for the like 20% of iterations, then it's like you're getting better. So
Yeah, I wonder if you've thought if there are any like guidelines or like updating like your contributor guide as to like things like that. And again, I'm just asking these kind of like on the spot, so and just curiosity of myself. So maybe you haven't thought about it, but yeah, I just think of like these are tools. I mean, okay, here's my real opinion. It's like, everyone's using AI to code. Like it's like there's not going to be a PR. Like you can like update the docs to like make it not, or like the comments or to make it not look like AI or whatever. Like less emojis.
pull
Don't
out
use
the line by
That's
line.
about
yeah. Like don't use the what are they called, the
a
double
rocket.
dashes?
Oh
Or, like,
yeah, the M dashes. M dashes.
yeah, don't use that. And then okay, there's no real way to tell because but the reality is like we're all using it to some extent. So like what even is an AI generated PR? Like so that's like my real opinion. And then I think a lot of it is on just like us as people who like are like core maintainers, or even in like as like leads on a team. Like your goal is to now make sure that you have in place tools that or like guidelines or CI stuff or like whatever it is, test everything to like make sure there's like this code quality issue has been a thing forever, right? It's not like
Yeah.
it was like, oh, suddenly we have to worry about like we've always had to worry about it. So I'm curious if you're thinking about like how can you update those or you can add things like that for these contributions.
Yeah, in some ways it feels like analogous to the challenges that like the education industry is seeing, right? Where it's like, okay, students are gonna use AI to like help them with things, and you might as well like acknowledge that and then like set guidelines in place. So we're releasing like a new rollout of our docs with consolidated docs for all of our open source libraries, which we're excited about,
Very
which will come
cool.
with the new contribution guide.
Oh,
And
awesome.
I actually don't think that we've updated it to reflect kind of guidance with this, but we definitely should. So I will do that. And yeah, I mean, I think like leaning into it, this even ties back to our like initial conversation about like what's a great way to like get started with open source as a like new and young and developing engineer. And I think it's important to realize that like the differentiator for up and coming engineers is not going to be like very, very technical. I think it's going to be like soft skills and strategy and like ideas and things that are not just like things that AI can do for us
Yeah,
now.
not just
Um,
lines of code.
and so I think like, being a good open source contributor now probably means like using coding agents and then also like writing up really good docs and engaging with issues in ways that are like helpful for maintainers and things like that.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I will say, I will add on to that is that I think we see some of these patterns. So, for example, like right now, it's October, which means Hacktoberfest is going on. Which I always see maintainers complaining about Hacktoberfest because the incentive is not correct. Like the incentive is like, I just want to get a PR, and even if it means I'm just editing out so that the E is moving the E to the side or something like that, And like those sorts of PRs, you can see the person isn't putting much effort into it. They're just doing it to get a PR in. So I think the same is there with AI. You should, even if you're using AI, like the human element needs to be there. We should be able to see that you've put some thought into what you're putting into the code base, especially for more, important for larger code bases. It's really important. So I would say, yeah, I agree, Gwen, with the idea of updating the contribution guide. And I think Sydney as well, like treating people with kindness, assuming good intent, unless we can really see minimal effort was put in here. And there's a rocket emoji and impact. Like I think, yeah,
The rocket emoji is the giveaway.
it's the
Yeah.
giveaway these
It
days.
is.
I
It
love
is.
the rocket emoji. Yeah.
I think there's a good way to like still be kind to people. Like I think some open source maintainers are like, this is AI generated. Like, how could you do this? Like,
Yeah.
and it's like, I feel like it can be a little better. Like,
Yeah.
ha ha ha. Like, a little too many emojis on this one. Like, we're gonna click now.
Yeah.
Like there's like a better like kind of
the way to do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna expect LangChain contribution guide. No rocket emojis. No, it was
No
the
oil
code.
dashes.
I didn't say no rocket emojis. I think
Whoa.
Awesome. This has been great. I don't know, Marlene, if you have any final questions.
I don't think we do. We're super excited about V1. When can people expect to use V1? Can we say a date or like a time range for when people can expect it?
yes. So we're just a little under 2 weeks away from when we expect to launch it. So
Amazing.
the week of the 20th is when we're expecting to launch. But alphas are available now, so we'd love if people would go and try them out.
Sweet. We'll have links in the description for everyone to go check that out. Sydney, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And we would love to have you back on sometime in the future so we can talk about more stuff.
That would be lovely. It was so great to chat with you guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Nitty. Thanks, everyone. Bye.